for this event called Data Drop, all about how the quality, presentation and use of data can influence policy outcomes. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Chi Onwurah, MP, Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, Dr. Catherine Cutts, former Chief Data Scientist at number 10 Downing Street, Richard Lum, a partner at Newton Europe, who are kindly sponsoring this event, and Paddy McGuinness, former Deputy National Security Advisor. And the broad range of panellists just reflects the fact that data has become so integral to every aspect of modern society. Now, we are swimming in data. In 2022, 3 times as much data was produced by humanity as in 2019, just 3 years before. We have data everywhere. We have data which we generate in our personal lives. Public organisations have data. Private organisations are harvesting data from us for our use. And how we use that data, how we present that data, how we manage that data, who can access that data, are all fundamental questions about policy, about public service delivery, and about private outcomes that matter to all of our lives. There are certain truisms about data. We all know that what gets measured gets managed. And so what data is used can affect how policy affects things. If no one is collecting data for care leavers, for example, then no one will care about care leavers because they can't care about them because they don't know what's happening. We also know, though, that data you can have too much data. You can have so much data that you can't pick out what's important. And so we need skilled data analysts, skilled data operatives to be able to sift through that and tell that. And these are not value-free choices. These are choices which must be made, but they're also skilled choices which we need very smart, very clever, very committed people to doing this. We also know when it comes to delivery, how do you know if you have these big billion-pound government programs, if we have whether that's delivering public services, whether that's delivering infrastructure. We all know there are cost overruns, there are projects which everyone would support, which the government has to claw back money from. And that happens under a Conservative government, and it's something which Rachel Reeves said in her speech yesterday. She was going to launch an inquiry into some of our biggest projects in order to make sure that we deliver them effectively. Well, data will be at the heart of that. And then finally, there is a fundamental question about who has access to your data. Sometimes we talk about open access data, and that's great if it allows companies to package up data which had been hoarded by government and create new products. But maybe it's not so great if it means that your neighbour can look up your medical records and find out deeply personal things about your life, or if people can create apps which will allow people to join dots together in unpleasant ways. So we have to think about ethics in data, and we have to think about that because of AI will supercharge what every individual with a desktop PC will be able to do with that vast sea of data outside. So that's the introduction. We have 4 great speakers who know far more about this than I do, who will be highlighting some of the ways in which good use of data can influence effective policy and delivery. And so without further ado, I will turn over to the Shadow Minister for Science and Innovation, Chi Onwurah. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Ian. And that was a fantastic introduction because it demonstrates, the fact that data is part of everything we do, and it is part of every if you like, department of government. It's part of the machinery of government. It's part of how we live our lives, and it is increasingly part of how we how we engage with each other. So I'm going to just make some general. We could talk about this topic for hours. I'm going to make some general remarks and look forward to a debate about what are the key issues which are raised with regard to the policies that a Labour government should be fortunate to be elected, should bring in. And my perspective on this is very much driven by my background as an engineer. And I just want to start by saying that the UK, we should remember the UK has a really proud tradition when it comes to technology and innovation. And in my constituency of Newcastle Central stands the shed where Robert Stevenson and company developed the key enabling technology of the Industrial Revolution, the locomotive. Every country in the world and every person in this room has felt the impact of their work. And just as Britain led the Industrial Revolution, the industrial carbon-based revolution, Labour wants Britain to lead in the digital revolution, which is happening, but which is ongoing. We're clear in our industrial strategy, and Johnny talked about that yesterday, that Labour will harness data for the public good, using new capabilities in data analysis and artificial intelligence to deliver better public services and improve people's quality of life. And that is a mission in our industrial strategy, and the fact that it's part of our industrial strategy, emphasizes how important it is to our economy, as well as to our public services and to our social commitment. And I know what it's like to work at the cutting edge of new technologies. Before I came into Parliament, I had what my constituents still like to refer to as a proper job, working in tech as an engineer for over 20 years. And my experiences there, and the last 6 years, I was working in the private sector for 14 years, and the last 6 years I was in working for Ofcom, so in the regulator, just as, if you like, the social media revolution was just as the internet actually was beginning to gain prominence. And so I know the immense value of new technology, but I also know that it is important to be forward-looking in how you regulate it in order to minimize harms. And I think the increasing volume of data, which you talked about, is one such double-edged sword for government, communities, and business, and one which this government, or the series of chaotic governments, has been very, very slow to kind of understand, and very, very ad hoc in its approach to it. But Labour recognises that we can only unlock the benefits of data if there is public trust. And often my constituents, and in the midst of a cost of living crisis and being texted by the Department for Work and Pensions every day to ask them what they've done today to find a job and how long they've spent on looking for jobs. They see technology as something that is done to them rather than something that happens for their benefit. They feel as though opaque new products from tech companies have an increasing impact on their lives, and that they have no power to change or impact that. And digital technology can be a great leveler, and I call myself a tech evangelist, because it can really be an engine of progress, but we need to make sure the infrastructure and the skills base exists for everyone to take advantage of the opportunities it provides. And I think it's a real sign, it's a real indictment. There are many indictments of this government, you may say, but we haven't had a digital literacy strategy since 2014, and at that time the digital inclusion target was 90%. It's basically saying 10% of people, who cares if they're not digitally literate or they're not digitally included. That is unacceptable now, and therefore, I think we need to ensure, if we're going to have data and digital for the public good, we need to ensure greater digital literacy. We need to also government needs to lead the way in using data effectively and in a way that inspires public trust. And just looking at what Boris Johnson did amongst many things, but when he was repeatedly in Parliament giving inaccurate child poverty figures, for example, on 3 separate occasions, falsely claiming that child poverty had fallen, that really undermined public confidence in data and in the government's ability to measure its own success. And that's one of the things that also in government we need to change. So throughout the public and private sectors, we need people who are comfortable handling and interpreting data and who can challenge falsehoods, and we need to increase digital literacy. We also need robust regulation and standing up vocally for the democratic privacy and security rights of UK citizens. As Ian said, it's also kind of impact our democracy. And we need to make make the most of the benefits of data. Labour would support the UK's wider digital economy by ensuring workers firms and research groups have access to the talent, skills and computing power they need to contribute to that. So the mission to harness data for the public good relies on a partnership between business and government, and we can lead the way based on public trust in looking at how data can be used to drive better outcomes for public services, how data can be shared in a way which still gives control over that data, and how the benefits, in particular in the NHS, and for example, Wes Streeting has been talking about this, the way in which we can use data to target treatments and to increase the effectiveness of treatments and the availability of the right treatment. So there's a huge level of potential up there, but we need a government that understands that potential and understands the associated risks. And in the Shadow Science Innovation and Technology team, led by Peter Kyle as Shadow Secretary of State, and you've heard him speak yesterday, we are determined to deliver on that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Chi. And I'll turn next to Richard Lum, our sponsor for the event, and he's going to talk about how they are using data very practically at the moment in order to deliver some of these improved outcomes.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Shadow Minister. And good morning, everyone. So to briefly introduce myself and Newton, Newton are productivity specialists. We partner with government to unlock complex delivery challenges, both at a local and a national level. And key to our methodology and approach is the use of data and analytics, both to make sure we understand the problems we're trying to solve, but also to track the improvements that are being made, much to the points about evaluation. And so it's from this perspective, perhaps a bit down in the weeds of delivery, that I want to share my thoughts on how data can be used to deliver policy outcomes, and really a focus on the behaviours and cultures that need to be true to get value from this. And to start us off, I think it's helpful to remember that it's not all about the data. So people might be familiar with the phrase that data is the new oil. And while I agree with some of the sentiment of that, I think we need to bear some caution to this, because it creates the sense that ownership of the data is the thing that is valuable. The data to itself is not valuable. What is valuable is the way that data enables us to make decisions and the granularity of decisions that can be made. And what's really exciting is when we can start to use machines to increase the velocity and granularity of decisions, which in turn can improve outcomes for people in receipt of public service. And so just to paint an example of this, we're doing some work currently partnering with academia and local authorities to build better preventative care models using data. So linking data across health and care, using artificial intelligence, we can predict with a 70% accuracy people in the community who are at risk of falling over, ending up in care, losing their independence, and enabling local authorities to build better preventative mechanisms to support those people to live independently and reduce the cost to the taxpayer and to the systems. So I think the evidence for the benefit of evolution in technology is clear, both in terms of improving outcomes and savings. But what we need to think about is how do we scale this and how do we use this to deliver sort of more broadly. So the first point that sort of comes to mind on that is just because decisions can be automated doesn't mean they should be. I think people have heard a lot about sort of the rogue algorithms and bits that have plagued public delivery recently. And we are at a particular point in the AI and automation hype cycle in particular, where almost the default is, well, let's automate this, let's bring AI in. And I think we need to be careful to remember that in the delivery of public service and delivery of policy outcomes, we're dealing with real people here and not widgets. So I think there's firstly, to the point on regulation, a role for regulation to both ensure we are protecting and conserving the citizens in the use of data, but also to help make sure that we can actually maximise the value we get from this technology and we use it in an appropriate way. And like in that Falls example that I shared, while the use of data can be a really helpful tool in understanding what happened to that individual in the past or happened to similar individuals in the past and interventions that have been effective, the data by its very nature is flawed. We are never going to have a complete understanding of an individual, and therefore we should be wary of anything that's looking to completely take the human out of the decision-making process. So I think the first point there is, like, just because we can automate it doesn't mean we should. The second point, and Ian, you touched on this in your intro, we are now awash with data. Advances in technology have made data capture, data linking, data analysis much easier than it has been in the past. But we need to be careful not to fall into the data trap. Often when presented with data and as it becomes easier to analyse, the temptation almost is just to investigate that data and see what it can tell us. Half the battle is asking the right questions of the data and working out the problems that we want to solve. And so, Ian, you mentioned the sort of skills necessary to interpret and analyse data in your intro. I think there's an equally important point here, which is the policy skills that we have working in partnership with the data skills to really make sure we're asking the right questions and evaluating that data before we get stuck too far into the ways that we can cut and slice the data to paint a different picture. And the last observation that I wanted to make around data was the data itself is only as powerful as the hand that holds it. And we tend to see two modes of delivery when it comes to data in the delivery of public service. The first is one that says, great, we've made all these advancements, we've got all this data, let's democratize it, let's give everyone access and do with it what they will. Now, I think there's lots of benefits to that from a transparency perspective and from an accountability perspective, but there are also some delivery challenges we need to guard against in this. The first is delivery of public service is a complicated system, often made up of a number of silos, and in democratizing the data, we need to be careful that silos don't ask questions of the data that reinforces their own view and embeds ways of working that aren't maybe conducive to the overall system. The second failure mode, though, is in making data available to everyone, there's a risk that we assume everyone is then using it. And actually, the reality is often the people who most need the data are the people at the front line who have the delivery pressures and challenges already in place and not necessarily the skills and capabilities to make the most of it that they can. So that leads me to the second failure mode, which is a risk that as data becomes more available, we have this sort of covetous centre who likes to hold on to the analysis, be protective of it and use it to produce insight and capability that serves their means. And clearly, again, that falls into the trap of not enabling frontline decision makers to use data in the right way. So in summary from me, I think it comes down to some real leadership challenges, both in ensuring that we use data responsibly, that we ask the right questions of the data, but that we really make sure that it's plugged into those who need to use it at the front line into the delivery of outcomes to improve and enhance the way that we deliver outcomes through policy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. And then turning to my left, Dr. Catherine Cutts will share some insights from her time in the heart of government at number 10 Downing Street.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. For my contribution, I thought I'd sort of flip and talk a little bit about how you use data, or how I've seen data being used for decision-making right at the very centre of government. And by way of kicking it off, just to sort of focus on three successes or three things that I saw during my time in the civil service that worked well, and then three big challenges that I can see the future governments having to deal with and having to confront to really make sure that they're continuing, that they're making the best decisions and continue to do so. So in terms of success, I think one of the big changes that's been seen over the past few years is using real-time data in decision-making. So previously, if you wanted to get some data or some analysis into number 10, it was emailed in a PowerPoint, printed off, shuffled down the corridor, put in front of the cabinet or whoever in a meeting. Then at the end of the meeting, it was thrown in the bin and sort of you'd have discussions hours later sort of saying, hey, what was that number that we saw from the NHS? This sort of seems like it's going to be relevant. Now we're talking about schools or whatever. And there was no real kind of holistic 360-degree view of data. This is something which is changing. So there's sort of the digital teams within the civil service are doing a huge amount of effort to build automated data pipelines, to build dashboards, to build data systems. So this means that policymakers are able to view data across multiple topics when they're making a decision, because everything is linked. It's very difficult to make decisions around, let's say, education without then also kind of thinking about the employment situation and so on. And so this I think is allowing overall kind of better decisions, but also faster decisions to be made. The other improvement that I saw is around the analytical private office. So the civil service is divided into two streams. You kind of have the policy stream, who are, to be really, really sort of stereotypical sort of arts graduates, and you have the analyst stream, who are really, to be very stereotypical, science graduates. And this, as you can imagine, kind of leads to a bit of a separation between the policy and the data. So the analysis is being done by people who don't get to sit in the room when the decisions are made and who are not necessarily kind of representing their analysis into policy. One of the changes that's been made is what's called the analytical private office. So it's making sure that very senior civil servants and ministers who want them have teams of analysts who are sat at their right hand, who are then able to scrutinise what's going across their desk, who are able to plug into the broader civil service analytical network and just generally kind of be that intelligent layer of scrutiny right at the decision maker's right hand. The other partial success, I would say, is around the communication of how data is being used in decision making and publishing data. So the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, has always published a huge amount of data, everything that it really can publish legally and you know, for sort of national security reasons, they will. Anything they can publish, they will publish. But this has sort of always been slightly hidden from the public in the sense that you won't necessarily see, well, the ministers are making their decision based on X, Y, Z, and it's this data set, and it's this particular analysis, and so on. And I think the pandemic certainly necessitated a bit of a change in principles there. So I definitely see kind of the public being more interested in understanding what data their decision makers are using to take decisions and holding them to account for said decisions as being a real step forward. In terms of three challenges that I see, making decisions that are holistic when you've got very different levels of data available on different sort of sides of the coin, so to speak. So the Treasury always has phenomenal economic data, so any case that they are able to make and kind of bring to the table looks absolutely ironclad and is very, very, very well thought through and very laid out. Other departments don't necessarily have this data because actually kind of the data that they need is longitudinal and nobody thought to start collecting it 20 years ago for right this moment now, and therefore sort of when they make their policy decisions, they're doing it in a world of slightly less data, and the decisions and the policy sort of tends to be more based on principle. If you're then trying to make that decision in the centre and you've got kind of a wealth of data and what looks like a very, very, very ironclad case, and you've got something which is more, well, we don't know this, we don't know that, but we believe that these are the right things to do, or we want to do this, it becomes very difficult to make that decision fairly and balancedly, and that is something that I certainly saw as being a challenge, and I think will continue to be one. The second challenge is increased sophistication in the methods that we're using to make this data. I mean, I think, or to make decisions based on data. AI obviously is the really key topic of the moment, but I think even more broadly in the past, you've seen decisions based off the outputs of predictive models, which obviously are the best representation of the future that the person who built the model knew how to make, but actually sort of there is a world of decisions and assumptions and all sorts of things that went into that. And as a policymaker, when you kind of see the output of this, which is this is a number and this is our best guess at the number, really knowing how to put that into context and how to make a fair and balanced decision is a big challenge. The third and final point is around silos in government data. So it was already mentioned here, and I think there's sort of two challenges. One is, if data is siloed, then it makes it very difficult to kind of get this holistic data that you need to do a really good job on delivery. The other challenge with siloed data is when it gets into the centre for decision making, you'll have one department who's been analysing their piece using their data, another department that hasn't necessarily shared their data, and so you're in effect kind of building stories and cases with data in the same way that you would do if you didn't have the data. It's just you're kind of backing them up with numbers rather than whatever you'd use if you didn't have the numbers. This then again I think can lead to a slightly antagonistic form of decision making, right? Because it's then sort of whose story is most compelling and which side of the coin do I believe, whereas actually sharing that data and having a kind of shared analysis across departments to begin with, I think would make a really big difference in terms of really surfacing what the best decision is and then bringing more of a consensus decision to the table, which can then be optimised rather than sort of decision-making as competing stories.
Brilliant. Thank you. Very interesting to hear that straight from the front line. And then finally we'll go to Paddy McGuinness, who, as well as his role as being former Deputy National Security Advisor, currently works with data in a number of private sector settings, and we'll talk more about the use of data and who owns the data, who accesses the data, the ethics of the data, and various other things of that nature.
All in 3 minutes. Amazing. I mean, it's great going last because you get to synthesise what people have said for, and then we've had some brilliant, I think, points there. I really wanted to raise five things. Great to have them enumerated. And just reflect back and kind of reinforce points made by the Shadow Minister. And it's very exciting to have someone coming into this role with a real practical understanding of the development of technology and what that looks like, and of engineering. And I do hope you get to be Minister, and I do hope you get to be Minister for a stretch, and so you can actually do something with it. So here are 5 thoughts. The first one is, I think that data is as important a utility for the well-being and prosperity of the United Kingdom as energy. And I think that we should think about it that way. Now, with that thinking about it, saying this is a utility, we're going to really apply ourselves to data across systems in order to optimise its availability and use in the United Kingdom, with that becomes a responsibility on the part of government to make use of it, not to bury the talent in the garden, but rather actually to invest it to make use of it. Many of you, all of you probably, have made use of the DVLA digital offering. Yeah, and it's really good. And I think it's a really good platform. A little bit clunky compared to, your cutting edge consumer accessibility of the web. The DVLA was meant to be the start of the digitisation of government. Yeah, but it kind of was the end of it, because having delivered that, they kind of stopped. So I think if we say this is utility and government has to have a profound say in it, and it's a public good, there also is a responsibility to really pull it through and make use of it. So then the second thing, and the term that the Shadow Minister used was trust, and Catherine, I think you referred to it too. I think about consent, and I don't mean the 30-page, would you tick here, you consent to that. I mean genuine public consent that absolutely goes with digital inclusion and education about the value of data. I know the value of data. I had a cancer which used to kill 90% of people within 2 years, but because data was pulled across the NHS and it was possible to look at what worked and what didn't, now 10% die within 5 years, and I'm 20 years in remission, so I'm very happy, right? So I know what the value is of pooling data and making it available, but we've got to make people understand that and secure their consent at the beginning of the process, as you said, Shadow Minister, not have them feeling that technology is something that is done unto them and does them down, and not have a dystopian view, not least because, of course, they have given up so much of their data to the surveillance capitalists, and therefore already at a massive disadvantage, almost none of whom are British, even though they invest here. So consent and building that in and educating towards it and building trust is critical, which leads me on to my third point, which is the quality of data and the constant improvement in it, and radical transparency about what data is being used for what and its quality, and accepting, as I'm sure Catherine would say, that you make use of the data that's available to you, but you expect the next time you make the decision to have improved that data and to do better. That needs to be an active part of the public discourse. It needs to be radical transparency. I don't know about you, I have real concerns about generative AI as it is at the moment, the large language model we use. And we all know that we get erroneous results from it. What we don't know is the data pool that is being drawn upon. There is no transparency there. Interestingly, in my commercial work, I see private companies buying closed LLMs, being very clear about what data is in it, what quality, and able to constantly improve and add to that data, and they get far fewer negative results and are able to use the technology, the AI technology, for much greater value. Yeah? So I mean, really important about the quality of data. Also because, yes, data may not be the new oil, but it is part of our national attack surface. Yeah? When I used to oversee offensive cyber operations in one way or another for the British state, interfering with people's data so they had an imperfect understanding of the world was a key part of cyber warfare. Therefore, quality of data and a real grip on it, not just because you want to make productive use of it, because you want to be resilient, it's critical. Then my fourth point is about the risk of capture. Okay? So we all know the value of the data that's in the NHS, and there's been a very active effort to make that data stored in the UK or under UK control in various ways, available for our use, not exported. I would beg any incoming government not to make the mistake of being blindsided by superficially more capable commercial enterprises that offer nirvana, and I'm not including Newton in this, who do a very different task, right? You worked in Number 10, you'll have worked with Dominic Cummings. Forgive me, amongst the stupidities of Dominic Cummings was that he rushed into Number 10 saying, I understand tech companies, and he brought with him, who did he bring with him? Babylon and Improbable. What is Babylon? Babylon is a company that wanted to access healthcare data to be able to sell the product from it for insurance and other purposes, yeah, while not delivering a particular public good from that healthcare data. These people should not be let near our healthcare data, and they should not be introduced to government. So government really building up capability, and wonderful that Catherine was there, and she could probably advise on how to do this. So not being captured is critical. And then my final thought, and forgive me, this does reflect my national security background. One of the best things that I saw when I was in government service, when I was dealing with technology at an institution in Cheltenham, was a fantastic thing called the technology risk. And about once a quarter, what would happen is we'd look at what was happening to technologies that were relevant to us, either that would improve our ability to deliver our mission or would interfere in our ability to deliver the mission. Okay. Now, the best businesses, and I suspect in her current job, Catherine is well abreast of this, know very well which technologies are coming through, what they're going to do and how to make use of them. Government can be a bit sluggish. Government has to get far, far faster at this, not least because it is radically changing with the availability of large data sets and the application of machine learning / artificial intelligence. The speed with which you can know things unexpectedly is incredible. I want to give you one example. I've recently been looking at a company, I haven't quite concluded what I think about it, called Strider Intelligence. I'm not asking you buy them, use them, I'm just describing them. But they're an American company. They've got phenomenal access to Chinese open source. With that Chinese open source, they can map out a set of things. They can map out what's happening to your intellectual property and whether or not patents are being listed in China using your intellectual property that's been stolen. They can tell you whether or not researchers involved in your programs are actually working for the Chinese state enlisted this, there, and they can tell you whether or not the companies are in your supply chain are actually owned by the People's Liberation Army. And they can do it like that with no access to your data. That's available today now. Right? It's profound implications for academic institutions, profound implications for a Minister of Science and Innovation. Not because that means we shouldn't do any business with China. I'm absolutely not one of those people. But because we can do informed business with China, knowing what is problematic and what is not, because we have a way of perceiving it. What I'd note is this product was not available 9 months ago. Now it's profoundly available. Profoundly available, and it's just the beginning of the kind of insight that we will get, which will shape policy. And if we're not really clever about it, it'll misshape policy, because it'll lead us to false conclusions about, oh, we can't do business with China, or we can't do it, as opposed to giving us the kind of real clarity about what is problematic and what is not. So that's understanding emerging technologies and getting a grip on their application before they mess with your policies.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paddy. Absolutely fascinating insights there. Before I throw it open to questions from the floor, I do just have one question for the Shadow Minister, which is, we heard from Catherine, who was working, in the Number 10 in a national crisis, most sort of exciting data roles you can get in government. But we know that, we're going to need brilliant people in data across all of government, and HMRC and the Passport Office and the Student Loans Company. And we know that public sector salaries have not kept pace with inflation or with the private sector. We know that we've heard a lot about these very nimble, exciting opportunities, including no doubt Newton, who can offer things which the public sector will never be able to compete on a directly pound for pound basis. So what would a Labour government do to really build the cadre of skilled data analysts, data policy makers that the public sector needs to deliver?
Well, thanks. That's a question which particularly also reflects, the 13 years of denuding, destroying, if you like, public sector capability almost quite deliberately by a succession of Conservative governments, because they don't believe that the public sector can do good, and also they don't want the public sector to be effective. So we recognise that there's a huge sort of challenge, for us in both restoring faith in the public sector, ensuring it has the resources it needs, and also building the morale of the public sector. And I suppose the first thing that we do is make it clear that that we respect and appreciate public sector workers. We don't believe that civil servants are the enemy within, as I think was it Jacob Rees-Mogg put it. We believe that that our civil servants are what it just says, civil servants, and doing good on behalf for the public good, but specifically, when it comes to ensuring that we have the skills, I think that is a combination of the work that Bridget Phillipson is doing within the Shadow Education team in supporting and rewarding the education sector, and also so there's a lot I could say in answer to this, but the role of further education colleges and apprentices and apprenticeships in delivering more of the skills that we need for the future economy. But when it comes to recruiting into the civil service, it's not my role really to talk about the changes, if you like, to the machinery of government that we are considering or we are looking at. But I will say that having a public sector, people do not generally go into the civil service to become millionaires or to make lots of money, and I think that's true. That's true in this country. It's also true in the US, which sees a significant, much greater exchange between the public sector and the private sector in terms of generally, and when it comes to specific sort of science skills. So I think that by promoting and supporting our civil service, that makes it more attractive for people who actually, as well as being great data scientists or artificial intelligence experts, want to change the world for the better. And that's, one of the reasons that I moved from engineering to politics. And I'm sure that's something that also will inspire, particularly, those with a sense of social justice to see the civil service and the public sector as a worthwhile career.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Paddy, you wanted to say something?
I just simply wanted to say, so I talked earlier about the technology risk, about having a moment where you say what's happening in the technology space and what should we do about it. I think one of the consequences of that is that you make a judgment. I could give you a little 4-box model if you were interested. Come and see me afterwards. But, so some of the things you hear about, you think, right, we need that as a sovereign public sector capability. And you build that and you invest in it and you recruit, and you may pay salaries or you have other incentives that draw people in. And we've been very good at that in the defence and security space and arguably in healthcare in some areas too. But there'll be other things where you say, this needs doing at the moment. This is better provided by people who do this all the time. We can rotate in and do the task for a while, can prove their effectiveness, and if so, remain partners of ours. But then we'll move on to the next technology, which I think is basically the Newton model, that they come in and solve problems with the available data and people and tasks that needs to be delivered, which it would take government an age to recruit for and design for. So I think having that kind of strategy allows you both to have sovereign capability in public sector, but make best use of what is a tremendous tech capability in the UK if we pull it through and fund it.
Brilliant. Thank you. So questions from the floor. I'll take 3 at a time, and if I could ask people to just say their name and affiliation, and to keep questions brief, please. I start with the lady just there.
Wasn't expecting to go first. Such a great panel. Oh my goodness, so many ideas. So my name's Ros McNeil. I'm an Assistant General Secretary for one of the trade unions, National Education Union. And I was really struck by the questions about how we ask the right questions of the data and how we have people with the right professional skills to know how and when data helps us, and how you keep the human in the room, because there's when data helps us, and how you keep the human in the room, because there's so much that data can tell us about particular groups of pupils and what might be helpful, constructive interventions. But we've also got a real complex challenge now where we've got an education system a little bit too hooked on data in a way that the young people hear the discussions about the data. So at the age 11, the young people hear the flight path they're on, and they hear all this data language, which is very demotivational for lots of young people. So how do we keep the human dynamic of using the data very, very sensibly? So many questions, but I have to stop because I can only ask one.
No, well, thank you very much. That's a great question.
What a great panel.
The gentleman just there, in the white shirt with stripes, and then the lady in the front row after that.
So, hi, I've also got to say, great panel, real practical experience across it, which is quite refreshing. I'm Chris Donald, I'm from Utilita. We're an energy supplier with a lot of data, and we're looking to share our data with public bodies to tackle fuel poverty. So not a question, but an offer. We're looking to get our data out there with trusted partners, so we can really target support to people who need it. If anyone's interested, I'm here. I'm in the stripy shirt.
Great stuff, thank you. And then the lady in the front. Oh, we've just got the microphone coming round. Sorry.
I'm a Labour councillor, but I'm also studying computer science. So my question is kind of more how these companies in the public arena would maybe work alongside universities, so when people graduate from that their skills are kind of relevant to the public sector, and perhaps something that is ethical to kind of go into with that application of data on complete.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll go along the panel, and please feel free to address either one or more than one of the questions as you wish. So, Richard, starting with you.
I think the question I probably feel best placed to answer is yours about how you keep the human in the decision-making process, particularly in the proliferation of data. And I think, as you say, there's lots of aspects to that question. There's lots of ways to answer it. Two things come to my mind. I think one is at the really practical level, and it comes to my point on automation. A lot can be gleaned from the data, but as I say, the data is inherently flawed, and we will never know everything about an individual. And I think we really need to respect the real value that our frontline staff have in understanding the individuals and importantly, the context within which decisions are being made. And so I think any tools that we are looking to produce need to support the human aspects of decision making in the context and provide them additional tools to call on rather than supplant or replace. And I think there's some good examples like that when you look at frontline staff and how much time they get through other support mechanisms like peer support or challenge, which can sometimes be limited in a stretched workforce. Data can provide a really helpful tool for reassurance, but not as one to reproduce. I think the other angle to this, though, is away from the frontline decision making, how we use data. And I think there's a bit to Catherine's point about the analytical private office. We need to be careful not to separate sort of the policy and the digital decision making and removing the front line too much from the decision making process. So I think there's a real challenge for governments in making policy around how they bring frontline experience into the policy making, both so that the policy is informed by the real world experience and frontline experience, but also so that frontline decision makers feel empowered and feel ownership of the policy decisions and things that they need to execute on the ground. So I think there's both a micro and a macro response to that question, which we could probably talk about for a whole other hour, but hopefully that shares some thoughts.
Thank you. Shadow Minister.
Great, what great questions, and it is a fantastic panel, and I find it both inspiring and some aspects of it frightening in the comments that have been made. And I was thinking, this is just sort of relevant to to your question about kids looking at seeing the pathway that they are on, at 11, just as when if they were forced to take a grammar school test, they were identified as being on a certain pathway. Now, because we've got more data, is that really reflective of the pathway that they are on? And is it all the pressure and that puts on children? And listen to Catherine talk about the dashboards in number 10. I was inspired and pleased to know that there's the live dashboards. But then I thought, is the mental well-being of a kid in a state school in Newcastle on that dashboard? And I think the answer is no. Should it be? I don't know that. How could it be reflected? But I do know that it's really important to me and as an MP and to the country, our mental health well-being of kids. So it's always what data, those decisions about what data is included and what data is excluded are key decisions. And the dash, as we say, garbage in, garbage out, and the dashboards are only as good as they're designed to be. So I suppose my answer on that question is more generally is that we need robust regulation, and robust regulation shouldn't be seen as like barriers to innovation and to understanding, but it should be about, and having worked for a regulator, you can have regulation which is about enabling fair competition and supporting innovation as an innovation duty on regulators. And what a Labour government is looking at, particularly when it comes to AI, is to ensure that robust competition enabling, trust enabling regulation is in place, and that also means human. Currently, as part, we have a requirement as a legacy of European Union legislation. We have a requirement that there is a human being in the decision-making process. It can't purely be algorithmic. And the Home Office lost a battle on this, a legal battle on this a couple of years ago, I think now. But if, for example, my understanding is in the US it isn't, and you can be fired from your 0 hours or sort of job for non-compliance with an algorithmic requirement of what you're achieving without human intervention. And we need to be very clear, about what this is. That's what I mean by robust regulation. What we mean by robust regulation, which protects people, but enables competition and innovation. And that has to, is even more the case when it comes to the public. The public sector and the public sector data, which people particularly have a right to. I'm very pleased that you're looking to share data, and if you want to get in touch, I'll take that back. And I think just on sort of the computer science and for example, we in Newcastle we have the National Institute for Data Innovation, and we have and I know, having gone to speak at one of their opening, that they are very looking at what the ethical issues are around access to data. And I think this is. I don't like calling it I don't call data the new oil, and that's partially because my background is of Nigerian heritage, and I can see what oil exploitation has done to many countries around the world. But it's a brave and hopeful and inspiring sort of new pathway for all of us, and we are learning as part of a public debate. Learning what the best kind of way to deliver on the benefits of data and data exploitation analysis while reducing or eliminating the downsides.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And now turn to Catherine and then Paddy, and if I could ask you just maximum sort of 1.5 minutes each.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll talk very quickly around sort of universities and public sector collaboration. I mean, I think clearly there are avenues that exist at the moment, and in Manchester Uni you've got a very good department that sort of focuses on this. So I think whilst ideally at every uni there would be a facility for raising great ideas and kind of facilitating government university collaboration, that there isn't, but there are places there. What I would say more broadly as well is that I've seen some very good examples of sort of student analysis of policy problems that have then kind of made their way sort of through mostly through the Office of National Statistics, but kind of some things crossed my desk, let's say. As a good example of this is there was a really great study that showed about the impact that proximity to a play park has in terms of kind of young child development and overall sort of, health and just general social outcomes. And so a student did a really great bit of analysis using publicly available data, which basically kind of identified, look, here in the UK are the hotspots where children are not within half an hour's walk or whatever the golden radius was of a play park. Here's therefore where we'd need to build them. And by the way, doing the analysis in this way and doing it kind of in a very sophisticated manner meant that overall you'd sort of build only those which were needed, let's say, to meet the desired outcome rather than necessarily sort of potentially overspending on it. So I think it's not ideal, but I would definitely say sort of good ideas and using the data that's made available by the ONS, people will listen for sure. And the ONS is also a very friendly organisation. I'd encourage anyone interested in this area to reach out to them.
So very heartening to hear and a very interesting project. And Paddy?
So, I mean, clearly there's no democratic mandate for data determinism, for a kind of, hidden social credit system around what happens to 11-year-olds and the way in which their lives are mapped out by data. And it strikes me that we should be really demanding. In that point I made about quality and the quality of the data and its use, we should be really demanding. And I think there are a couple of things we should demand. So one of the things we should demand is that the use of these systems should give the human being in the loop more time to interact with other human beings. And it's something that I'm involved in a digital healthcare business supporting the NHS, a scale up, so we're not supporting all of the NHS. But a critical thing we're trying to do is give the clinician more time to have a productive and positive interaction with the patient by taking away some of the tasks they currently have to do because of the clunkiness of the digital systems and the lack of support around them. And then the other thing is, my word, we need an independent view of what we're doing. I've been really heartened by some work that's just beginning by Professor Phil Howard at the Oxford Internet Institute, of a thing called the International Panel on the Information Environment, which is third sector funded, so not funded by tech, not funded by government, based in Zurich, is going to take a view on misinformation, disinformation, the application of algorithms, the application of data science, and test it against standards of equity using independent data scientists. And we need that kind of independent view of what it is we're doing, because I'm afraid too much of our lives has already been captured by companies that frankly are not transparent about the criteria, the data they're using and the criterion they're applying when making judgments about us. And we need to unpack that and not accept it.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had brilliant questions, brilliant panel. I think I'm just going to pick up on the point raised by the member of the National Education Union about that sort of data determinism, because of course in the pandemic we saw probably one of the best examples of data being used with the vaccine rollout, but also one of the worst with a sort of mutant algorithm for A-level grades. And actually, this shows both the potential of data, but it also shows us what happens when you take out those failures. And a lot of the things our panel have been talking about today will hopefully get us more of the first and less of the fewer. I'd like to thank you, Shadow Minister, and thank you to all our panel. If we could show our appreciation to them.